Hi, I'm Anthony, your internet older brother,
And I'm Gabby, the silent middle child.
and welcome to the 9th episode of our weekly Hey Anthony podcast with topics chosen by our Patreon viewers.
Absolutely. This week we're going to be covering some critical topics, including the news that shook the nation about Charlie Kirk's assassination, including some critical new Supreme Court rulings, and the ramp up of ICE.
Absolutely. And as always, do remember that we are not experts in these topics. We're two millennials sitting on a couch talking about the news. So you shouldn't use our podcast as a primary source, but we do, of course, do our best to stay informed and keep things factual so that you can cut through all the noise in the news and keep yourself informed as well.
And if you're watching on our YouTube channel, please keep in mind that you can watch these videos when they are posted on our Patreon by subscribing for $3, less than a cup of coffee, $3 per month. So thank you so much to our current patrons, and let's get right into it.
Yep.
Let's begin with the biggest news story of this week, which was the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Absolutely.
This was really shocking to the entire nation. And I think an important place to start is who is Charlie Kirk and what are the ideologies that he dedicated his career and life to spreading?
Absolutely. And yeah, I think that's a great question because to a lot of people on the left, Charlie Kirk may just be that Republican guy that goes to college campuses and debates, but the truth is actually a lot more than that. So Charlie Kirk was a Republican activist that is known mainly for his youth outreach programs. He did a lot of work with Republican youth organizations, specifically his own, Turning Point USA, that focused on recruiting youth, especially young men, into into Christian nationalist ideas through various types of, I guess you'd call them outreach programs, and also for his college debates, which were often sponsored by the Turning Point organization, which had a lot of connection with right-wing Republican mega donors. So he was very close to the Trump administration and part of the whole process of recruiting youth, which, affected the vote that got Trump elected in the first place. We do know that a lot of young men especially voted for Trump in this last.
Yeah, Trump actually thanked him and acknowledged that
exactly.
he couldn't have won without him.
So Charlie Kirk was really instrumental in getting part of that vote. And, to say that he's a Republican activist doesn't really put the proper emphasis on just how vile of a person Charlie Kirk was. So, just to give an idea of how bad of a person Charlie was, let's talk a little bit about what he said. He's quoted talking about race, very racist ideologies, typical with, white supremacy and white nationalism. He would talk about black people a lot, saying that, things like if he had a black pilot on an airline, he'd be nervous. That if he had a black customer service representative or somebody helping him and they were bad at their job, he'd wonder if they got there because of merit or because of DEI. He said that, he said that prowling blacks, that's his quote, would go out on the streets to basically hunt white people for sport. So, just absolute racism and dehumanization of black people. Extended, of course, to trans ideologies. He blamed trans people for mass shootings and all sorts of things. Really, I think one of the main people responsible for the real hatred of trans people on the right now, and focus of them as one of their main enemies, along with Latinos. When we're talking about women's rights and women in general. He believed, of course, like a lot of Christian nationalists do, that women should be submissive to their husbands. And, even when asked if he would get an abortion for his 10-year-old daughter if she was pregnant because of rape, he said that no, she would have to carry it to term. So, absolutely awful human being. And when it comes to gun violence, even then he's, of course, supporting the very thing that killed him. He said at one point that he does believe that it's okay to have some gun deaths in order to protect our Second Amendment rights to, quote, protect our other God-given rights. And which he was talking about when he was shot too. He was actually equating, again, trans people with mass shootings shortly, basically the moments before he was shot with his very last breath. It goes even further than that. One of the things, ironically, is that after this shooting, a lot of the right has been calling for empathy for Charlie Kirk and his family. And Charlie Kirk himself said that he doesn't believe that in empathy, that it's a left-wing, what was the word he used?
That it was made up by the left
that
wing.
it was made up by the idea of empathy was made up by the left and dangerous. So, all these together, you have basically a psychopath, racist, homophobic, misogynistic. I could go down the list. Charlie Kirk was one of the worst people you could possibly think of, and he was instrumental in recruiting vulnerable young men and women, but mainly men, to the cause of the Trump administration and Christian nationalism.
Yeah, and I just want to point out that, the way that he is being remembered right now by the right is as somebody who, reached out to young people to encourage them to vote and for his Christian values. So none of this is being spoken about, and even it's actually angering the right for people to be bringing up his direct quotes.
Yeah, and Christian values is especially ironic because one of the main things that Jesus and the biblical God preached is empathy for others.
Yes.
And he's quoted as saying that empathy is made up and non-existent. Not to mention just the general hate, which is completely antithetical to the idea of Christian values. But
Absolutely.
all of that is conveniently forgotten in the aftermath of all this.
Right. So I want to get into this assassination itself. What are the facts that we actually know about this shooting and information that we have about the suspect in custody so far?
Yeah, less than it sounds like, or less than the media would have you believe. So, as far as the shooting itself, it occurred on September 10th, 2025. Kirk was at one of his college debate events, and he was in the process of answering a question on gun violence and blaming trans people for said mass shootings when he was shot from approximately 200 yards away. According to official sources, it was from a roof of a nearby building. There's been some questioning about that from military members on social media. I don't know enough about shooting trajectories to actually say if the questioning is correct or not. But the official line is he was shot from 200 yards away with a high-powered hunting rifle. He pretty much died immediately. He was, taken to the hospital and whatnot, but yeah, he was shot in the neck in the carotid artery and bled out almost immediately. And from there, the first day was very hectic. There were several people that were detained or briefly arrested as possible shooting suspects. They were released. The FBI did a really poor job of handling the investigation. They were saying that they had some information, then didn't have it. Stuff was correct, not correct. And it wasn't until about 2 days later that we had an actual suspect that was arrested for any period of time, and that was that is a 22-year-old by the name of Tyler Robinson, who, according to the FBI and official sources, had confessed to his father that he committed the shooting, and then his father spoke to a bishop, a bishop in the Mormon Church, who contacted the police about the situation. I think it's important to note that Tyler Robinson is just the main suspect at this point. He has not been convicted of anything. So, despite all the speculation on the left and right about his motives and things like that, it is important to remember that until he's actually convicted, we shouldn't assume that he's guilty, but he is the main suspect at this time.
And how unusual is it that we heard a lot of this information first from the president himself?
It's very unusual. Like, traditionally, presidents don't get involved in direct law enforcement activities, especially with the FBI. Which is not to say the president doesn't have any impact over it. The president does nominate things like the FBI director. But it's not usual for the president to get involved in cases like this for a number of reasons, including, just optics. The most powerful person in the world, ostensibly, should not be commenting on criminal cases. And it can cause all sorts of legal problems too. And we see this in previous presidents, just to use Biden as an example, right? Biden could have used the FBI, and maybe should have used the FBI, to be honest, to prosecute Trump a lot more closely for January 6th and other things like that than he had. And that is traditionally how presidents have handled the FBI, is to be hands-off. Maybe they'll make a statement about tragic events like this, but for him to be following it so closely and making announcements that they have the shooter and announcements that the FBI should be doing themselves is unusual, and as we're finding out, was intentional. The FBI was intentionally withholding information from the public so that Trump could announce it, as we later found out.
And what does it mean for this country that Trump and the Republican Party had such a strong reaction to this shooting as opposed to all of the other school shootings, including the one in Colorado that happened the same day?
I think that's very on par with their MO, right? There's a lot of hypocrisy in the Republican Party, including, as we talked about, like this idea of empathy, right? We have all of these school shootings. We had the one in Colorado, 4 kids died. Last month we had another school shooting in Minneapolis where 2 children died, 18 were injured. There was some additional adult casualties at a church, nonetheless. It was from a Catholic school, and they were at mass. Um, and you don't even hear about these in the news anymore, right?
No.
Like local news might cover them, but that's about it. Certainly nothing out of the Republican administration, nothing from Trump about all of these mass shootings. We have, thousands of children and teens potentially impacted each year in gun violence, um, and and basically nothing, right? But, even when we're talking about Democratic lawmakers, there was the assassination of 2 Democratic lawmakers
Right.
a few months ago. And we barely heard anything from Trump at all. He made a very brief statement online. Certainly nothing to the degree that we're seeing with Charlie Kirk. Even some celebration among Republicans that some Democrats were assassinated. And then when we come to Charlie Kirk being assassinated, who isn't even a politician, he's just a social media figure,
Right.
all of a sudden everybody's calling for empathy and trying to start calling for war. Basically they're really up in arms about a civil war, really wanting to make a martyr out of him. And the president is calling for a vigil in DC for this, again, social media activist. He's not a politician. He's not a major Republican Party donor or anything like that. He's an activist. And I think it's a sign of really how shallow and hypocritical certainly the administration and the party as a whole, that they're so quick to discard other lives as unimportant, but when it's one of their own that's shot, all of a sudden it's cause for war.
Absolutely. So throughout the process of all of this information coming out, I think it's been very confusing on both sides because there's been a lot of misinformation, from FBI and from the news. So how can we know what information to trust?
Yeah, I mean that's been a huge problem as well, especially the FBI, because as that Kash Patel and the FBI has come under a lot of criticism from both sides, really, about how the investigation is handled and what type of news is being leaked ahead of time. We when the shooting originally happened, we had information that his wife and kids were present to see him die. There was a big uproar on the right about like having empathy and how awful that would be, which is obviously true. It would be awful for that to happen. We later found out that they weren't there. They actually were called by the FBI after the fact to inform them. On the left, we had a lot of speculation that Tyler's father was a law enforcement officer or a priest or both. That turned out not to be true. From what I understand, he's a granite worker. He contacted a priest who then contacted law enforcement, but not the same. And even regarding the actual evidence for who the shooter is, right? One of the big things that was speculated is that when they found the rifle after the shooting, there was inscriptions on the bullet casings. They'd been written on with what turned out to be various internet memes. There was some things from the game Helldive where there was a Italian anti-fascist song. Some other things as well, and the right was speculating that they were related to like trans support or not trans support, and what it turned out in the end is that this is mainly a bunch of online memes that may be related to a far-right group led by Nick Fuentes called the Groypers. They may not be. They may just be a sign of troubled youth. It's really hard to say, but both sides, although especially the right, were having a lot of rampant speculation and misinformation about who he is. And again, we don't even know if he's the shooter yet.
Right.
Certainly suspicious that he is. I think he is a good candidate, but we have not confirmed that.
Right. Well, I think the first piece of misinformation and the biggest one, most powerful one that came out was that his wife and children were there and witnessed this. And I don't think that's a coincidence because that was a huge emotional pull for people to have empathy for the situation. And regardless of whether they were there or not, this is awful for his children.
Yeah.
That's a given. However, I think it speaks a lot to what people view as acceptable deaths in America.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been a big thing, right? Going back to the mass shootings, is like you have all of these deaths that are happening weekly.
Yeah.
in the U.S. with mass shootings, other things, the Democratic senators, and no uproar on that. But when a white Christian male is shot, all of a sudden it's not acceptable.
Right.
Right? The tides are turned.
And we all need to grieve.
Yeah, we all need to grieve. All of those other people, they had wife, children, parents, brothers, sisters. You don't hear anything about
Exactly.
that. But when Charlie Kirk dies, well, think of his wife and children.
Right, and people talked a lot about the gore of what
Yeah.
they witnessed, but that's the same thing that happened to all of these students
Yeah, absolutely.
who have been shot over the past several years.
Absolutely.
So when this occurred, both the Trump administration and the right immediately characterized this as an attack from the left, but before we even had any suspect in custody. Is this something that Trump is using to further his authoritarian agenda?
I think so. The whole situation reminds me a lot of a situation that occurred, again, going back to history rhyming, in Nazi Germany with a youth leader that was killed in the 30s by the name of Horst Wessel. And I think that the Trump administration is basically trying to make Charlie Kirk into another Horst Wessel, or to put it another way, a martyr. To go into that a little bit, so Horst Wessel was a youth leader, much like Charlie Kirk, in the 30s. He started out in several Nazi youth organizations. I think one was called the Olympia Association, the other was like the Viking Organization or something similar to that. And eventually joined the SA, which doesn't have a direct parallel in the Trump administration. The SA was a paramilitary arm that was mainly responsible for like protecting Nazi events and going out and doing general thuggery for Hitler and the Nazi Party. I think that probably the closest you could put in the U.S. is a cross between like maybe the Proud Boys and ICE. They kind of fill similar functions. So Horst Wessel was a youth leader, much like Charlie Kirk, and was assassinated by members of the German Communist Party in the 30s. And like the Trump administration is trying to do with Charlie Kirk, he ended up being a big propaganda figure, kind of a martyr. One of the marching songs that Wessel wrote for the SA was basically turned into the Nazi Party national anthem and stayed that way until Hitler took control of the party, at which point it was kind of like the second national anthem. And there's been a lot of talk by the Trump, like Trump has literally used the word martyr. They're trying really
Yes.
hard to make Charlie Kirk a martyr.
Yes.
To serve that same purpose, to really like energize the base and turn it against the left more than they already are. And I think it's important to say that, they were doing this before we even knew it. We still don't really know who is responsible for this, the left, the right, or if any party at all. Like, as we've spoken about in one of our shorts, it's quite possible that Tyler Robinson is just an angry young man that was really unaffiliated with either party, and not following one ideology or the other. Whether that works or not is up in the air. It's very suspicious that they started doing all of this before we even had a shooter in custody. It was
Right.
immediately, the left is to blame for this. The Utah governor was talking about how he was praying that it was a
Yes.
left-wing shooter, which is a really odd thing to say anyways, because first of all, why are you praying if the reason he's praying in the first place is because gun violence and domestic terrorism is almost always associated with right-wing extremist groups, right? White supremacists and religious zealots going after either minorities or religious institutions like mosques. So if he's praying, first of all, that it's a left-wing shooter because he doesn't want it to be another right-wing shooter that doesn't fit the narrative of the party. And also, why would you pray that the shooter is any specific
Yeah.
race? It's very indicative that they're trying to start a political war, a civil war, based on their own language.
Yeah, they're definitely saying the quiet parts out loud. I actually want to read a couple of the quotes because I think it's important to see where the political violence is being incited from. We have Trump saying we have radical left lunatics out there and we just have to beat the hell out of them.
While he was talking in the same breath about how he doesn't care about right-wing violence at all.
Correct.
Yeah.
Trump has actually also referred to Kirk as a martyr for truth and freedom. We have Laura Loomer saying debate time is over, you ended it. which is implying that, we're at a time of violence. We have people on Fox News like Jesse Waters saying they're at war with us. What are we going to do about it? We need to avenge Charlie's death, and so on and so on. And the list just goes on and on. With right-wing figures saying we're at war, we need to avenge him. Where on the left, you're not seeing that at all. You're seeing a very clear message of this is unacceptable. We are praying for his family. We're deeply disturbed. Our thoughts and prayers are with him.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's a very typical pattern, right? Is that the right likes to say that the left is calling for violence or looking for war or all of these things. But the truth is that whenever these incidents happen, almost unilaterally, you get on the left, especially from major political figures like Obama, Biden, AOC, and others, you get calls for nonviolence, you get renunciation of political violence, and disdain for gun violence in general. While the right is always trying to instoke further violence and civil war. And this is a pattern that I think actually is really interesting because there's a historian I like to follow on TikTok by the name of Tad Stormer that talks about this, and he actually equates it to how the Confederacy was right before the Civil War started. You had a lot of this really strong rhetoric and bravado from Confederacy leaders and soldiers that the Union was going to be very easy to defeat. They were all weaklings and they're calling for war and blah blah blah. And as history shows, it turned out not to be the case. It was a long and bloody war, and the Confederacy lost. But we're starting to see a lot of the same patterns in MAGA and in the Republican Party, which is very concerning because it led to a civil war in the past, and it may do so again. But it's almost universally the right calling for further violence and not the left.
Yeah, you even have Nancy Pelosi, on the left, saying that she's very disturbed by this and she's praying for his family, whereas, her husband was beaten with a hammer and the Republicans laughed about it.
Yeah.
Similarly, you have Tim Walz, where we just recently, over the last couple of months, had one successful assassination and another attempted assassination in his state of representatives, and he didn't get even a call from Trump.
Absolutely. It's empathy for me, but not for thee.
Absolutely. So meanwhile, while the right is trying to incite a civil war, basically, we also have them continuing this race war against Latinos. Can you talk about some of the Supreme Court decisions that we saw happen this week?
Yeah, so we have the continuing ICE raids happening to start with in Chicago. There was initial speculation that President Trump was actually going to pull out of Chicago, but it does look like they're going forward to that. Talking about Memphis and just really expanding ICE activities in general. And while they're doing that, there was a case that was pushed through in the Supreme Court through their shadow docket. The shadow docket is basically emergency decisions that they make while the court is not in session, which it's not right now, and are often quick decisions that are released without any type of explanation or justification for lower courts to follow. And the main decision that was made was in the case of Nome versus Perdomo, which related to ICE immigration activities in Los Angeles. And what had happened is that a lower court judge had said that the way that ICE was carrying out raids indiscriminately in Los Angeles by just basically going to, places of work to arrest people, and racially profiling based on things like accent, language spoken, what type of job people were working at. They were targeting jobs that were traditionally held by undocumented immigrants, like construction work and other things like that. And the lower court judge had said that this was basically in violation of the Fourth Amendment rights of these people for unreasonable search and seizure. And in the recent decision, the Supreme Court overturned that stay that was placed by the lower court judge, which follows the pattern that they've been doing of kind of not really making firm decisions on any cases. They're just overturning stays. So the idea is basically to fill up the lower courts with all of these cases that have to be brought individually rather than blanket rulings to kind of slow down the justice system and murk up the works of the justice system. And in overturning this case, they basically said that racial profiling and racial discrimination is okay, right? Because this is about things like, again, four factors related. Actually, on the Supreme Court website, it says whether or not immigration officers can rely on four factors: apparent race or ethnicity, speaking in Spanish or accented English, presence at a location where undocumented immigrants are known to gather, and or working specific jobs such as landscaping or construction. So they're saying by overturning the stay that it is okay for ICE to continue to racially profile people for being Hispanic, to make arrests, detentions. And, when you combine that with the way that detentions have been carried out by ICE so far, completely disregarding things like Alligator Alcatraz and other detention centers, which are completely inhumane, the Trump administration has been trying to deport people to third-party countries continuously, even after previous rulings. They've been known to take U.S. citizens and detain them for days at a time, if not longer, while they investigate them. And people have, basically disappeared, and we haven't heard about them except for lengthy investigative work into their whereabouts. So they're really trying to create a situation that I think is similar to Nazi Germany, with this idea that, disappearing people is a lot scarier than,
Right.
even if they're detained in lawful ways, right? They want to be able to grab whoever they want that looks Hispanic, disappear them. Maybe they're in a detention center, maybe they've shipped them out of the country, and it is very similar to Nazi Germany, and they're continuing to set the steps to do that.
What does this mean for Latinos who are U.S. citizens? Because without due process, how are any of us safe?
We're not. And that's what it comes down to, right? It is designed to create fear. It's designed to be a race war, as you said, and we're not safe. We're not safe. This is the start of persecution, like the Jews had in Germany, and they're trying to bring that to Hispanics and others in the U.S. Right? In Germany, it wasn't limited to just the Jews. It was they also were very strongly campaigning against gay and trans people, against union workers, and other minorities, and we're seeing that in the U.S. as well.
And even beyond Latinos, we're seeing this with any non-white group of people, any minority. Can you talk briefly about the Hyundai raid that just happened?
Yeah, so this happened at a plant in Georgia, I believe, which was being set up by Hyundai, the car manufacturer, and it was supposed to be bringing a lot of jobs to the state, right? This was basically a new car manufacturing plant. And South Korea, where Hyundai is based, had sent several hundred skilled workers to help set up the plant and to train American workers in how to run the plant, because this was new manufacturing technology to the U.S. And had it been successful, this would have created over 8,500 jobs in Georgia, the very type of manufacturing jobs that the Republicans love to talk about, and that Trump brags that he's going to be bringing to the U.S. And what had happened is that a Republican candidate wannabe had heard about these Korean workers who, just to be clear, were there legally
Yes.
to set up the plant. They were invited by the U.S. to be there. She called ICE on them. ICE did not do anything to verify if their presence was legal or not. Basically came in, raided the plant, arrested 300 of these Korean workers, took them out in handcuffs, and detained them for several days.
Wow.
At which point, South Korea got word of this and sent a plane to get them. And it's created this huge diplomatic incident. Hyundai has pulled out of the plant, maybe pulling out of other plants, nationwide.
Right.
And we're looking, as a result of this, at a loss of thousands of American jobs. Poor relations with South Korea, which is a country that is very focused on the idea of face and honor and respect. This could cost billions of dollars to the U.S. because of this one racist Republican candidate to start with, and also ICE again not doing their job to verify any information. They just went in and arrested all these people based on a phone call.
Right. A massive example of racial profiling.
Yeah, exactly. And this does show again how this isn't just about Latinos. This is about these were South Koreans.
Yeah.
And you can really see how it's expanded beyond the initial Hispanics.
And at the same time, we're seeing Trump continue to try to use the National Guard to militarize Democratic cities, with the most recent focuses being, I believe, Chicago and Boston.
Yeah, so they're going to continue to try and do that. I think nothing has really stopped them. The Supreme Court has laid the way for them to do so. And, unfortunately, this is a pattern that is consistent with National Guard use throughout American history. The presidents have used National Guard like this in the past, but on both sides, although it's typically Republican presidents using it to quash rebellions. One of the main historical examples was the use of the National Guard to quash Shays' rebellion, pre-Constitution. After we overthrew the British, but before the Constitution was developed. Um, and yeah, unfortunately, I think it's just going to continue and get worse and worse. He's got free reign right now, and we're seeing the increased militarization and presence of military force in all cities, but specifically democratic cities.
Has our justice system essentially been neutered at this point?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the Supreme Court, which is at the very top, is fully compromised. 6 of the 9 justices are Trump appointed or appointed by Republicans, and have shown a complete lack of any type of professional respect, responsibility, and they have actively prevented any of the lower courts, which may not be compromised, from doing their job by continuously overturning stays and cases by the lower courts that are questioning the Trump administration. When you combine that with the complete takeover of law enforcement by Republicans, the police, FBI, things like that, we don't really have any form of checks and balances left in the country.
Really dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely.
This leads me into our last topic, which is that we continue to see increasingly concerning and dangerous bills being introduced to Congress. Can you talk about the bill that was introduced this week and our implications for its civil liberties?
Yeah, so this is really scary. This was actually just this was actually just made public a few days ago, or at least brought to the attention of the public. And that is H.R. 5300, which was introduced to a House committee for approval. It's going to be introduced in about a week. And what this bill does is it essentially lets the Secretary of State, Mark Rubio, revoke passports from anybody who is deemed to be helping or related to terrorist organizations, which, as we know from the Palestine protests, they're willing to call anybody who is speaking out against the Republican Party's ideals a terrorist organization, right? We saw during the Palestine protests, they tried to label any supporters of Palestine as supporters of Hamas, supporters of a terrorist organization. They revoked a lot of visas of international students. And now they're trying to use that same tactic to revoke passports of U.S. citizens who may be speaking out against them. And, while of course they claim that this is only for, the worst people right now, they're going to use it however they want. He's already talked about using tactics. Mark Rubio has already talked about using tactics like this to arrest or detain people, and now they're trying to keep you in the country for, which, you can imagine the reasons they'd want to keep you in the country is to arrest and detain you for speech. So this is a complete violation of First Amendment rights.
Right. I think it's important to note, too, that just this week, in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's death, Mike Lee, Republican senator of Utah, was quoted saying the terrorists will not win.
Yeah, exactly.
And talking about the left.
What I think they're trying to do is they're trying to set up the idea that leftists and what they would call radical leftists are terrorists, especially in the wake of things like Charlie Kirk shooting.
Right.
And then they're going to try and revoke the passports of anybody who is speaking out against the Republican Party or things that they want, which is very similar to, Nazi Germany restricting Jews from traveling outside the country.
Right. Yeah, so this is also coming at the same time when Stephen Miller has called the organized left a domestic terrorism movement. And he's making a lot of threats about not only removing passports, but removing money. Do you think that that's even legal?
No, of course it's not, but that's kind of beyond the point at this point, right? What we're seeing is the move for the Republicans to make the United States a one-party country, similar to we saw the Nazis basically eliminating political parties in their country after they took power, right? They're basically saying that, any type of free speech can be labeled as domestic terrorism. They're going to take away your passports. They're going to potentially defund your bank accounts, arrest you, potentially deport you to God knows where, because we all know that there's no due process going on. So no, it's not legal by U.S. standards, but we're certainly past the point of legality in the first place. And that's very scary, being on the left, especially being a leftist social media figure, at least I should say. But it's important to be aware of what's going on in the country.
Absolutely. I think we're at a really strange time in this country where, if you go outside, if you go to your job, it almost seems like everything is still normal. Everything is still the same way that it was. But then we see all this happening, in Congress. And, when is it time for people to leave? Because I think we're getting to a point where people are starting to ask themselves, am I safe in this country anymore?
Yeah. That's a really, really good question, and of course, a sobering reality for anybody that needs to consider it or even can consider it. Because, as we've spoken about before, I think the majority of people, especially those that really do need to leave, are unable to do so. But to be quite blunt about it, if you are in a position to leave right now and you can, I think you should. It's going to be a personal decision for a lot of people, and there's a lot of factors that go into, how to do that, when to do that. But we're at the point where they're in the motions to start restricting travel, restricting bank accounts, things that would allow you to leave in the first place.
When we talk about leaving the country, a big response from people is often even suggesting that is unpatriotic. We should stay and fight. How do you respond to comments like that?
I certainly understand the sentiment, and I think that the answer is just that everybody has their own individual situations that, we can't judge as an aggregate on a whole. There may be people with family members that have severe medical problems that need treatment that they may not get with the collapse of the U.S. medical system happening before our eyes. They have young children maybe that they need to protect. Not everybody can be a freedom fighter, and not everybody can leave. And it's going to be up to each individual to determine what is right for them. And that's ultimately all we can do, is determine what's right for us.
So, so what would you suggest for those who are unable to leave or choose not to leave?
That's a great question as well, and it's actually one that our Patreons ask a lot. And, I said on the Patreon account that I don't necessarily think that I'm the best person to directly answer those questions. Because, while we come from a relative place of privilege, I think, we're certainly not super wealthy, but we do have options available to us. And I think a lot of the solutions that are available to people that need to stay, whether they want to or not, are probably outside of our lived experience. And so what I'm doing with the help of my Patreons is I am compiling a list of other creators who can speak to those solutions. Things like getting personal protection for yourself, like farming communities. That could include things like, growing food, medical options, reaching out, building community with those around you, and things like that. So I'll be releasing shortly a list with those creators that, Patreons and others can view. I'll release it for free so that anybody who accesses our Patreon can view that. And I'd encourage anybody who has those questions to, view that list and go look at those creators as well, because they can probably provide some information that I, to be honest, can't directly provide myself.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, guys, I think we're going to go ahead and end it there for today. Thank you so much for watching this video, and please remember to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube to spread this message. We are definitely working on building our YouTube subscriber base as TikTok is becoming relevant over the next few weeks.
Yeah, there's certainly some questions of whether TikTok will remain. We'll still be on all of our other social media channels, so Instagram, YouTube. We're getting Blue Sky and Skylight set up. You can follow us there at silentmedicalchild.com, although there's no content yet. And we'll keep everybody informed as we continue to navigate this social media landscape. Thank you again for everybody watching. If you want to see the videos live as they come out, you can join us on Patreon. Otherwise, if you're seeing this on YouTube, you get them 1 week late, but you'll be able to see them for free as well after that 1 week delay. Thanks again.
Have a great day.
Have a great day.